This month, PBS, in conjunction with local affiliate GBH, debuted the documentary The Busing Battleground, The Decades-Long Road to School Desegregation, as part of the American Experience television series. The program featured reflections by many prominent Boston area activists, including Hubie Jones, who has not only witnessed Boston history for 67 years, but has also shaped and defined the civil and social landscape. Most recently, Hubie founded the organization Higher Ground, which brings together multiple nonprofit agencies to work together, creating solutions to fundamental urban issues of housing, education, healthcare, and jobs. This month, JFYNetWorks will take the opportunity to expand on some of the history that Hubie shared with our listeners when he was a guest for 3 JFYNet podcasts last year. This podcast was created by JFYNetWorks, a Boston-based nonprofit provider of blended learning resources, training, and support. JFY's individualized, self-paced curriculum helps raise individual and school performance by maintaining grade-level skills and regaining unfinished learning. For JFYNetWorks, I'm Greg Cunningham. During 3 podcasts in 2022, Hubie Jones spoke with JFY's executive director Gary Kaplan at length about the history of racial segregation in the city of Boston, not just in the schools, but in every social, political, and economic corner of the city.
Well, when I came here in 1955, I was stunned by what I found. I found a city that was trying to come out of the economic doldrum, and it wasn't clear that it was going to succeed. Businesses had been leaving the city. There was no building of housing, et cetera, et cetera. It was in trouble. I also found a city which I called Up South because of the patterns of stark racial discrimination everywhere. If you went down to the shopping center stores downtown, Jordan Marsh or Filene's, there were no retail people serving you who were Black or of color up front. They were either in the stock rooms or on the loading decks bringing in merchandise. There were no Black motormen running subways. There were only 5 Black bus drivers. You had a situation where Blacks were basically segregated in the public housing system. In the public school system, there were very few Black teachers, no Black principals or headmasters. And there was basically a segregation going on that became fully noticed in the 1960s. In the public life of the city, you didn't see the presence of Black folks, not at sporting events, not at Symphony Hall. They were basically missing in action, and that was bizarre. This was the city that I came into, and you had also a parochialism that was entrenched, somewhat influenced by the hold of the Irish Catholic community that was suffocating. So this is part of what I found and was living with, when I first got here. And of course, if you look 50 years later, you just see an amazingly different city. I mean, you had a situation where the owners of the Red Sox and the Celtics basically had a practice that there could not be Black dominance on the ball field or on the basketball court. I remember the time that 5 Black players for the Celtics were on the basketball court at the same time, and the sports radio network went crazy. What do you think this is? We have the Black Knickerbockers here? You kidding me? We won't accept this.
They said that?
Yeah.
They said that on the radio?
On the radio. People calling in. Before they were shut down, this was expressed. Okay? So, and of course, when I go to a Celtics games today and see all these jerseys of Black players all over the place, okay? I say, wow, we've come to a different place, okay? During the time of the whole desegregation crisis, when you go to a Red Sox game or a Celtics game, particularly a Celtics game, it was like a giant Raw meeting. Remember Raw, Jimmy Kelly and Raw? It was like you had a giant Raw meeting.
Restore our alienated rights.
Right.
Wasn't that?
That's right.
And that was Jimmy Kelly and who else?
Jimmy Kelly primarily. But what a lot of people didn't know was that the criminal class in South Boston kept those folks in line. And in fact, we later learned that Whitey Bulger had played a role in trying to burn down Garrity's house in Wellesley. Okay, so there was an element of the criminal class in South Boston that kept Raw and these folks.
Hubie also addressed the specific segregation issues within the Boston public schools at the time.
Yes, things were starting to move. Okay, for Black Boston, really no. Okay, because they had basically, well, blacks didn't have political power. There was nobody in elected office. There was nobody in the mayoralty. They were involved in sort of advocacy that was sort of collaborative, and they were basically, the Black community was really not doing well and really frustrated. In comes the civil rights movement in the early 1960s. Okay, coming up from the South, from Alabama, all the way to Maryland, all the way to Washington, into New York. And in June of 1963, it hits Boston big time when Ruth Batson of the NAACP and Paul Parks of the NAACP Education Committee makes their report to the Boston School Committee, the all-white school committee, okay, chaired by Louise Day Hicks, and they make it clear that there's de facto segregation in the Boston public schools that has to be corrected.
And that's the old elected school committee.
That's the old elected school.
The elected school committee. So
elected school committee.
Political animal.
Political animal. The elected school committee, and basically they said, "We're not listening to you. We don't segregate kids in school. We basically assign them to schools nearest to their homes. Leave us alone. Your 14th point that we recognize de facto segregation, we won't do it." Well, they won't do it because they're getting political currency by having opposition to the Black community, because they were making a promise to their white constituents: you stick with us, you keep voting for us, and you'll not have to worry about your children going to school with Black kids.
As discussed in the PBS documentary, Civic leaders organized a student school boycott on June 18, 1963, to protest the continued segregation and inequitable resources in the Boston public schools. Just a few days later, Hubie organized a citywide boycott of businesses, culminating in a march from Roxbury through the city to Boston Common. The march also served to commemorate the violent assassination of Medgar Evers, the NAACP leader in Jackson, Mississippi, on June 12th.
During all this time, Hubie, what was the Globe? What was the Globe? We had a couple of newspapers, the Globe, the Herald. What were the newspapers? How were they handling all this?
Well, the Globe tried to get the school committee to really recognize what was going on for Blacks in the school system, and to get them to accommodate having some conversations and so forth, and indicating that by not doing this, they were making this a bad scene for the city of Boston. It was going to end up with all kinds of conflict, all kinds of difficulties. So they were basically on the side of trying to get accommodation and trying to convince Louise A. Hicks and her crowd, to really negotiate, but they'd have none of it. Okay, because it was giving them political currency. Okay, and after that school committee meeting on June 11th, which I was at, okay, where Parks and Ruth Batson presented, and the school committee said, "Get out of here." No.
1963.
1963. And for that whole summer, there was wild demonstrations at school committee headquarters. People were locked out of the building. Demonstrators got into the building, stayed overnight, ultimately left when there was a bomb scare. All of that went on. Okay.
Who were the leaders at that time? Who were the leaders of the protest at that time?
Okay, well, Kenneth Guscott, was the head of the NAACP. He was the president at that time. Melnia Cass was a big influence, and the mother of Black leadership. She called herself the mother. Ruth Batson was obviously a person involved. Otto Snowden and Muriel Snowden were involved. It was a pitched battle. Okay.
Was Mel in the picture yet at that time?
Yeah, Mel was in the picture. Now Mel was in the picture also with me because in April of 1963, I came up with the idea of having a one-day general strike called Stop, where we would ask all Black people and our white allies to stay out of work for a day to protest all forms of racial discrimination in Boston and not to ride the public transportation and not to shop. And I went to Mel King with the idea, and he thought it was a great idea, and he embraced it. And we brought in some other people to talk about it, including Tom Atkins, who was involved with the NAACP as their administrative secretary, or whatever you want to call him. And he sort of bought it, and it took off. The idea took off that we would have a stop day on June 26th to protest all forms of racial discrimination in Boston. And the traditional Black leadership said, no, we're not going to support this. First of all, who are you, Hubie Jones, coming out of nowhere, believing you're going to lead a work stoppage? Okay, it's time to make it clear that we're not going to take this stuff anymore. Okay, so all of a sudden, up jumps Tom Atkins and says, look, something has to happen on June 26th because people are expecting something to happen. So why don't we turn this into a memorial service for Medgar Evers, who was murdered the day before in Mississippi? Let's have a memorial service on the Boston Common for Medgar Evers. And we say, fine, you have a memorial service? Great. We'll march the people who stay out of work to the Boston Common. Okay, so fine. Okay, so on the morning of the memorial service, which is on the 26th, stop day, we have like 500 people who show up at a rally at the park in Lower Roxbury. We then put everybody in line with Mel King and I leading a march down Columbus Avenue. We got police escorts and all that stuff down Columbus Avenue to the Boston Common. As we were marching down Columbus Avenue, we're waving to people who are hanging out of the windows, come on down, join us, come on down. And people started running out of their houses. So by the time we got to the Common, we had 1,000 people. So we marched around the Common, around big, we didn't go right into the Common. We went all the way around Beacon Street, around past the State House, and people were stunned, looking at us with stony silence as we marched this group of 1,000 people around. And we finally get to the Parkman Bandstand. And as the people who were there already saw us, they all stood up on their seats and started clapping. Tom Atkins, who was pissed, looks at me and says, take your folks and put them over. Take your folks and put them over there. Well, he thought Stop was dead. And so he was surprised that this whole thing came to life. Now, an agreement was made that I was supposed to speak at the memorial service, but I was never called on. So that happened. But the interesting thing is that September, after the March on Washington, which was a kind of a pause because everybody was going to the March on Washington. Unfortunately, I didn't go because I was involved in something else with the Center Club, with a camp I was running for ex-mental patients. So Atkins in September throws an olive branch to the school committee saying, here's a plan for how you can desegregate the schools voluntarily by changing district lines, and there would not be very much transportation of kids. Okay.
This is 1963.
1963 in September.
And the NAACP is proposing a desegregation plan.
Voluntary.
Voluntary. Holy cow.
Okay. And it wouldn't involve much transportation of kids. Louise Day Hicks rejects it, saying that constitutes gerrymandering and that's unconstitutional. We'll have nothing to do with it. Well, it was a lot of nonsense. What she knew was that she had political currency by standing in opposition to Black demands. And that September, she got more votes than John Collins, the popular sitting mayor, which proved that it was working.
Many activists in the PBS documentary indicated their desire to bring people of differing backgrounds together to encourage dialogue and understanding. Hubie Jones took the initiative to create an organization to make that ideal a reality when in 2003 he founded the Boston Children's Chorus, a diverse group of young people from all over the city and the region, now comprising over 300 singers in 11 choirs, harnessing the power of music to connect the city's diverse communities, cultivate empathy, and inspire social inquiry.
Well, I saw the Chicago Children's Choir sing at a city national convention in June of 2001. I knew nothing about this choir, and they came onto the stage, very diverse, high school, junior high school kids, and they sang at a level of excellence that blew me away. And I said, oh my goodness, this is the model I've been looking for, because I've tried to find ways to integrate kids across the divides of race, ethnicity, social class, sexual orientation, and not very successfully. And I said, this looks like the model. And then I went to Chicago 2 weeks later. Tell me all about how you did this. And I said, I don't know if we can I can pull this off in Boston, but if I do, would you agree to come and give a concert at Jordan Hall so that Boston can see what it is we can build and how valuable it would be? And they said, yeah, we could do that. You know, like Martin Luther King weekend is like a three-day weekend, you know, and we could come on that weekend if you ultimately pull it off. We did.
The vision of bringing students together through schools had begun with the founding of the METCO program in 1966, allowing urban students to attend suburban schools. Hubie has high hopes for extended partnerships on the METCO model to encourage college students and faculty to become more involved with the Boston Public Schools.
Long time ago. It was in the late 60s, early 70s. There was an attempt to do that. How you do it, I don't know, but we do have the strongest, most enduring metropolitan educational system in the country. METCO being one part of it. You now have charter schools being a part of it. We need to think through whether this is a vision that should be pursued in the future. We have 350,000 students, college students in the greater Boston community. Lots of faculty members. We have intellectual firepower that you couldn't believe. We're not putting it to use. We're not harnessing this intellectual firepower to solve civic problems in Boston. It is crazy. The university people, as far as I'm concerned, only think about how they can bring more foreign students here that have a lot of money and play a role in their financial success. They won't stand up and say anything, have a voice around major issues where they ought to have a voice. Now, I will say that during the desegregation of the schools, Garrity got brought in the colleges to play a role with the Boston Public Schools. And one of the presidents of one of the major universities here, who will be nameless, said, Hubie, I'm pulling out of this partnership with the schools because they waste our time. I send my faculty over to work and they don't know what to do with us. And so I'm out of this.
Yeah.
Now I'm not leaving publicly. Nobody's going to say I'm not being a good corporate person here.
Yeah.
It's a good citizen here. But in reality, we're not going to waste our time. And apparently a lot of the universities feel that way. They don't want to be caught up in all kind of political nonsense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But hey, if I was 40 years old, I'd be starting a new organization that would be the Center for Community and University Collaboration.
Hubie makes it clear that when all is said and done, students need a reason to attend school, and schools should be happy, joyous, safe places, sanctuaries for students to thrive.
What I mean is that you have to have within the schools things like the arts, music, plays, dance, which are joyous things that are a part of the learning process. Because if there's no joy in a school, if there's no joy in learning, then who's going to invest in it in any major way? And I think this is, there's no debate about that.
All 3 JFY podcasts featuring Hubie Jones can be found on numerous podcast streaming apps and on our website, jfynet.org, which also features a wealth of commentary, dialogue, and free academic resources for all learning communities. The PBS documentary, The Busing Battleground, The Decades-Long Road to School Desegregation, can be found on the GBH app and on the PBS American Experience YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. For JFY Networks, I'm Greg Cunningham.